Thank you so much for joining me today, Addie. I'm so excited to have you on the channel to talk about bankruptcy, what that looks like, and I know the viewers are going to find a lot of value in the information that you're going to provide today. So go ahead, introduce yourself, tell me a little bit about your experience and what you do.
So my name is Addie Albareda. I am a bankruptcy attorney licensed in the state of Florida, and I've actually been in the legal field since I was 19. So, and I'm not ashamed to say I'm 51. So I've been in the industry for 32 years. I've hit probably every area of law, I've been a lawyer for 19 of those 32 years, and bankruptcy was actually a secondary. I've been mostly a real estate attorney most of my career as a lawyer. I've been in real estate, and when the market crashed, there was no real estate, and really I was the side of real estate that I started doing was a lot of foreclosure defense and helping people save their properties. That led me into the bankruptcy area because I was, whenever a foreclosure would come up, I had to stop those sales.
Can you explain to us what bankruptcy is? I understand that there's different chapters of bankruptcy for personal filing. Can you explain the differences between the two and kind of give us a little bit more insight on that?
Bankruptcy is a federal process that is in place to help individuals and businesses either eliminate their debt or reorganize their debt. It's a last resort. Nobody wants to file bankruptcy. And it's a little bit frustrating actually, because judges, creditors, a lot of times these lenders, they think, oh, here's another person trying to like beat the system. I'm telling you, I've been doing bankruptcies since 2009. And I have maybe 2 or 3 clients in the whole span of those years that really were trying to like pull a fast one. 99% of people are embarrassed to file bankruptcy. They feel like it's a failure on their part. And it's sad because they'll take 3 to 5 years before they decide, yeah, this is a good step. Many people at some point in their life will be in a situation where they just can't pay their bills. Bankruptcy is just one tool that we have to give you a fresh start. It's a beginning, not an end, which is a great line that I read, and it so summarizes what bankruptcy is. It's a time to give you a fresh start so that you can start again. The 2 main chapters that individuals will deal with is a chapter 7 and a chapter 13. Okay, chapter 7 is it's a complete liquidation of debt. Okay, that's the one everybody wants because that's where you're eliminating all the debt that you have. Okay, now there are restrictions on chapter 7, and most of it is depending on the income you make, your income and the assets you have. Because although they eliminate your debt, they also take your property unless they liquidate your property, unless I can exempt them. The exemptions are state-based, so it depends what state you live in. Here in Florida, we have a lot of good exemptions. So for example, homestead in Florida is one of the better exemptions in the states, which really protects your homestead 100% regardless of the equity. Now there is, again, limitations on acreage. It's only going to cover a certain amount of property, but for the most part, it's going to cover 90% of homesteads. And so anyway, chapter 7, when a client comes to me, that's the first analysis. I start looking at their situation and say, okay, number 1, do they need bankruptcy? I consider debt negotiation versus bankruptcy for every client. Or debt reorganization. Sometimes people don't even have that much debt. They just don't know how to handle it, and it's a matter of reorganizing them financially so that they can afford their lifestyle. So when a client comes to me, that's one of the first things I look at. Why do you want to file? What's your situation? So we know that chapter 7 is a complete liquidation of debt. At chapter 13, you will eliminate some debt, but a 13 is more reorganizing your debt. And most of the time you get to eliminate a large chunk of your unsecured creditor. Unsecured debt is anything that is not secured, it's not collateralized. So credit cards are, the main focus usually of bankruptcy, credit card debt, but you can also include in there personal loans, anything that's not secured by collateralized by either your car or some other property, your house. So in a chapter 13, I create a plan for the person that I introduce to the court and for consideration. And then the court at some point will agree with me and confirm my plan. And then that person is in the plan for 3 to 5 years. Chapter 7s are quick. So we're talking 3 to 4 months, you have your discharge for the most part. I mean, there are some exceptions, but for the most part. In a 13, it does take 3 to 5 years. Once you're done with a chapter 13 plan, is that you get your discharge at the end. But it's still a great option for a lot of people. Even when let's say you make a lot of income and you have to pay 100% of your debt, which does happen. They're called 100% plans in bankruptcy. You're paying that at 0% interest. So imagine, and I don't have the statistics with me. I've done them many times in my presentations, but the amount of interest that you pay on debt is ridiculous. Most of these credit card companies are, especially a default rate, will be in the 30s easily, 20 something, 30 something percent interest. Can calculate how long it would take you and how much it would take you're going to pay to eliminate that. When you file bankruptcy, you're done. And even if you have to do a chapter 13, let's say that's really your worst scenario, you're done in 3 to 5 years. And it's, even if you had to pay every single penny that you owe to the credit cards, you're paying it at 0% interest. There are a lot of reasons people fall into bankruptcies. You have job losses, you have medical bills, which now with this pandemic, it's going to be a big hit. Medical bills affect about 62% of most cases in the United States, of most bankruptcy cases. So it's not a little number. And now when you have something like this, the pandemic that we're going through now with coronavirus, even people that have insurance are going to get hit. That's just a reality. So that's another reason people file. Divorces, a lot of times you get out of a divorce, now you have 2 households in many cases to provide for. So, divorces are a big one. And just, misuse of debt. That's a lot of my clients, unfortunately. We get in over our heads and then we don't know how to get out. So, and like, I mentioned before, there's tons of good benefits that come from bankruptcy. It's not for everybody, but there's a lot of good benefits. I mean, you have, the first most beautiful thing about bankruptcy is called an automatic stay. And, a lot of my clients actually come to me for that one in particular because their creditors are calling them nonstop. Automatic stay is such a great tool because it stops automatically lawsuits, repossessions, foreclosure sales, evictions are stopped. Anything that's any collection calls for sure. I mean, they're not allowed to call you anymore once you have a lawyer. Utility shutoffs. Any of that is stopped by a bank the moment you file a bankruptcy case.
So you gave a lot of great insight on the nitty-gritty detail information of chapter 7 versus chapter 13. You gave us a lot of information about bankruptcy as a whole. Can you give us a little bit more insight on dealing with the emotional side of bankruptcy, why there's this negative connotation around it, and maybe give us some tips on how to deal with that information?
I do have a bachelor's in psychology, and I always make fun of that because I always say, wow, I've done more psychology in my career than I've done law. and it's a funny thing. I think it's the way we're raised in general. I think people are raised to do the right thing, be responsible. I mean, these are things that are taught to us early on. And, when a financial crisis occurs, there's so much guilt that comes with that. And that's where the feelings of failure come into play. Anxiety, embarrassment. Mostly people that have been in business understand that the bankruptcy is just a tool. We have a lot of famous people, that have filed bankruptcy. You had Abe Lincoln, you had Henry Ford. I think people that have been in business for a while know and understand that things happen. Not every idea is going to be a winner. And sometimes, what is the quote, the difference between a master and a beginner is that the master's fallen more times than the beginner's ever tried. Individuals are not like that. For the most part, my clients, they didn't even consider bankruptcy. They live off credit. Most people live off credit cards. They borrow money. And before you know it, it runs out. If you're having to visit your credit card debt, your credit cards, or take out personal loans just to survive, we need to talk, especially if you're using the funds to pay other credit cards or to pay other debt that can just be eliminated through a bankruptcy. So, but anyway, going back to the emotional side, it is sad because the emotional toll of bankruptcy is generally far worse than economic consequences. When you file bankruptcy, that doesn't mean you're never going to have credit. And in fact, credit starts rebuilding almost right away. I mean, it's within days probably or months of you coming out of bankruptcy, they're already sending you new offers. You have to do the right thing for yourself, okay, and your family. And that doesn't mean that you're just ignoring all your debt and you're going to be like, screw it, but you do have to come up with a plan that works for you and your family. And like I said earlier, to me, bankruptcy is a beginning. It's like a fresh start. We're going to put you in a situation, whether I'm negotiating debt or whether I'm filing bankruptcy. My goal is when you're done with me or I'm done with your case, you have a fresh start and you move forward where you actually have a life. You can breathe.
I think you're right. I had this conversation with someone last night that money is not a rational topic. There are so many emotions involved, and I think addressing the psychology behind bankruptcy is such an important factor when someone's considering filing for bankruptcy. So that actually leads into the next question. When should someone file for bankruptcy?
One of the first triggers is that if you're living off credit cards or loans, just kind of borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, that kind of saying, you really need to consider bankruptcy or at least reorganization. Do yourself, I can't even emphasize this enough, go see a lawyer that does bankruptcy. And I say lawyer instead of a debt negotiation company. It's not that debt negotiation companies can't help, but the only service that they have to sell to you is debt negotiation. Sometimes that is not a good situation. When you go to see a debt negotiation company, they're going to sell you that service because that's how they make their money. And not that I criticize, I mean, it is what it is. But when you go to a bankruptcy attorney, they're going to be able to tell you both options. Other reasons, if you have debt collectors calling you all the time, that's a good time to start considering bankruptcy. Another big reason to file foreclosures. Another good one is if you're liquidating your retirement. Stop it. Stop doing that. If you're taking, so retirement benefits, for the most part, like 401ks and things like that, are protected from bankruptcy court. The bankruptcy trustees can't get their little hands on that money, and so even if you have $100,000 in a 401k, if I file your bankruptcy, it doesn't prejudice you. It doesn't go against you for purposes of calculating how much you have to pay back to the court, if anything. So yeah, those are the main reasons people file.
So I actually had no idea that creditors can't touch retirement accounts when you file bankruptcy. That's the first time I've ever learned about that. That's so important to know, and I'm glad I know that now. I know a lot of people watching this are, either A, in the situation that they might need to file for bankruptcy, or B, they are approaching that situation and they don't want to end up filing for bankruptcy. So what advice do you have to avoid bankruptcy?
In my opinion, the number one way to avoid bankruptcy is to know your finances. Such a simple line, right? And it seems like that's just common knowledge. No, it's not. The majority of my clients, and I'm not talking about just, people that make 20 grand. I mean, I have wealthy clients that have been in this situation. They have no idea, really, to the detail that they need to know how much comes in, how much goes out every month. You have to have financial savviness to a certain level. You need to know the basics. That's all I ask you to do. So, what is your gross and your net income? What is your monthly and periodic payments? Because if you have no savings, if you don't know that a bill is coming, when that bill comes, how are you going to pay it? You're not. Know your information. Know what's in, what's out, and your balances on credit cards, personal loans, how much you owe your mortgage company. You should be creating spreadsheets that have this information. That goes to my second tip, which is create a written budget. And if you're not working off of an actual written budget, I don't want to. I don't want you to tell me I know what my expenses are. They're right here in the top of my head. I want to see written budgets. If you're not working off of a written budget, you have no idea what you're really spending or where you're at or what you could afford to spend. The other tip is that we talked about, and this is a big one that I talk to my clients about, is cutting expenses. That it's easy if you really put some effort into it. Your goal is going to be to get a grip on your finances. And we're going to do that by attacking like high interest debt. How do you do that? You want to be able to put as much money as you can towards those debts. And how do you do that? You cut non-essentials. Eliminate, like I said, discretionary spending, dinners out. And it always comes back to food, because for some reason, almost all my clients have an issue in that arena. You don't need to go out every day. It's kind of like retraining your brain of how you look at finances. Another step is prioritizing your debt. So we categorize, when clients come to me, I categorize their debt. Like, what is a necessary debt, like your mortgage or your rent. And then you look at all your other debt, like your unsecured debt of credit cards, personal loans, anything else that's not necessary. And then those you put in an order. So this is kind of going to take me into the 1, 2, 3 steps that I take with my clients. And like I mentioned, the first step to me is always creating a budget. You budget your absolute necessities, what you're going to need, like housing, transportation, food, utilities, any legal obligations you may have, like child support. These are all things you can't get away from. All right. So your budget should begin with that. Then you have, then you organize your debt from highest interest to lowest interest. Okay. And that's, so, maybe other lawyers or other companies do it differently. I think that's what makes sense. I've done the math on many clients in the past. You want to get rid of high interest rates. Once you have that in order, then you're almost ready to pay. The step that I kind of do in between, which sometimes you need and sometimes you don't, is considering deferments or forbearances. Even if you buy yourself 2 or 3 months, let's say, even if you have the money to pay, let's say you can defer your mortgage for a month, okay? And the company agrees without hurting your credit, obviously, and most of the time the deferment's not going to hurt your credit because it's an agreement with the bank. The bank might agree, okay, we'll tack this to the end of your loan, and we're going to give you the month of May, to breathe. That money that you would have paid that mortgage that month, which could be significant in a lot of my clients' situations, apply it towards a debt of the highest interest. So if you could do that with a couple of debts, like say your car payment, you do the same thing, and you could defer it, or your student loans, that's a big one that you could generally defer. And sometimes for a year. I mean, it depends on, you don't want to be, these kind of accounts still accrue interest. So it's not like you want to defer forever, but if you can buy yourself 6 months of extra cash, that's what you want to do. because our goal is to build up as much as we can to go paying off the credit card debt. So the last step that I really have them do is budget and put them in order of how we're going to pay. And these are not options. These steps are 100% necessary. If you truly want to avoid bankruptcy and get out of your debt, you need to go through these steps. Of course, the last advice for avoiding bankruptcy is actually speaking to a bankruptcy attorney and seeing have somebody analyze, or even if you don't want to go see a lawyer, talk to your accountant, do a financial analysis, make sure you know where you're at. It might not be as bad as you think.
I think you touched upon a lot of really key components that people are going through right now. I've gotten a lot of questions about deferments and forbearance and whatnot for debts during this time. And, coronavirus is not just affecting a handful of people, it's affecting everyone. So can you give us a little bit of information on how coronavirus is affecting the bankruptcy industry as a whole and where you see it going?
Now, one of the things that I do foresee, that I don't know if it's good or bad, honestly, is that the courts are definitely going to be more lenient towards, especially the bankruptcy courts. It is a court of equity, so it's going to try to work with people to help them out of the situation. I also foresee a lot of, we already have a high percentage of cases deal with medical bills. I think I told you like 62%. And I do see an increase with that because even though a lot of people have insurance, even when you have insurance, you have co-payments and deductibles and things that people are not going to be able to afford. So I do see an increase. I see an increase overall in the bankruptcy courts, like in the court filings. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And if we're in a situation, you need to deal with it. I want to see people take steps to get out of the hole as soon as possible. Don't wait. My biggest advice through this whole video is do not wait. Do not wait for 3 years and 5 years to then decide, oh, let me go do bankruptcy is a good idea. You've just wasted 3 to 5 years of your life. You're not getting that back. The only thing we don't get back in life is time. So, let's be smart about it. So if you are suffering financially, or even if you're scared of where you're at financially, reach out, contact me, contact you, Amelia, or any bankruptcy attorney or any CPA, anybody that can help you kind of go through your financial situation and figure it out. So I don't know if you had other questions for me.
No, I think you touched upon a lot of great pieces of advice and information. You educated us all. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to give us this information. And I look forward to future videos where we can discuss further pieces that you mentioned, but in further detail. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and you have a great day too.